Welcome to Betrayal Stories. In today's video, I never imagined that a single evening could completely rewrite the story of my life. What began as an ordinary night, just dinner, a quiet movie, and some small talk, turned into something that would haunt me forever. It's strange how life can twist so suddenly, how a moment that seems harmless at first can shift everything you thought you understood about love, trust, and yourself. That summer felt endless. The sun poured through the windows every morning, flooding the house with a warmth that only made the silence feel heavier. My husband, George, was always away. Another business trip, another late-night call that I pretended not to question. At first, I used to wait up for him. I'd cook. I'd try to fill the table with laughter. But over time, the laughter faded. The calls grew shorter, the excuses longer, and I started realizing our marriage had become more like a contract than a connection. We lived together, but it felt like we existed in separate worlds. Loneliness has a sound. It's the creak of the floorboards in the middle of the night, the tick of the clock when you can't sleep, the echo of your own breathing when no one else is around to hear it. I had gotten used to that sound. Until Liam arrived. Liam was George's son from his first marriage. 21, quiet, polite, a bit unsure of himself. He was supposed to stay for a few weeks before figuring out his next step in life. When he first came, I didn't think much of it. He was just a young man, helpful, friendly, always respectful. I welcomed him like family because, in a way, that's what he was. The first few days were ordinary. We'd talk over breakfast, laugh at small things, and share quiet evenings watching movies. I remember thinking how refreshing it felt to have another presence in the house, a voice that wasn't coming from a phone speaker, a smile that wasn't half forced. Liam had this calm energy about him, like someone trying to find his place in the world but hiding the storm inside. George, as usual, wasn't around much. He called now and then, saying he'd be home soon, but soon never came. I stopped asking. I stopped hoping. Instead, I poured my energy into keeping the house alive, making meals, listening to Liam talk about his plans, his college dreams, his confusion about who he wanted to be. He was young, searching, and I could relate to that more than I wanted to admit. Then came the night everything changed. It was one of those evenings where the world outside feels too quiet. Rain had started to fall, soft at first, then steady against the windows. George had called earlier to say he wouldn't be coming home that weekend. I remember nodding, saying, okay, trying not to sound disappointed. I made dinner for two and opened a bottle of wine, not to celebrate, but to fill the emptiness. Liam came downstairs after his shower, his hair damp, his expression tired but kind. We sat on the couch watching a movie neither of us was really paying attention to. I could feel something in the air, unspoken, uneasy, something I couldn't name. He looked at me for a moment, his voice quiet as he said, "You look sad." I tried to laugh it off, told him I was just tired, but he didn't seem convinced. He said he noticed I was always waiting for George's calls, always pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't know what to say. Hearing it from him, someone who barely knew me, hit deeper than I expected. That night, our conversation turned honest. For the first time in a long time, I talked about how distant things had become, how invisible I felt in my own home. He listened. Not the way people usually listen, half distracted, but really listened as if every word mattered. I asked about his mother, his life, his fears, and he spoke with a kind of vulnerability that mirrored my own. It wasn't romantic. It was human. Two lonely souls recognizing the ache in each other. Over the next few days, something unspoken settled between us, a quiet understanding. We'd cook together, share jokes, talk late into the night about everything and nothing. It was innocent, but emotionally intense, like two people clinging to warmth in a house that had grown too cold. One morning, I found a note on the counter. It said, "Thanks for listening." Just that. Simple. But it meant more than I could explain. Because sometimes, all we need is for someone to notice us. Still, guilt began to seep in. I felt like I was walking a line I didn't understand. I wasn't doing anything wrong, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying something. Maybe not George, but myself. Then, one night, everything shifted again. We were sitting outside under the porch light. The air was warm and the crickets filled the silence. Liam looked at me and said, "I don't think George realizes what he's losing." My chest tightened. I told him not to say that he didn't understand, but part of me knew he did, because George had been losing me for years, slowly, silently, without even noticing. That moment was heavy, not because of what was said, but because of everything that wasn't. I excused myself, went inside and cried quietly in the kitchen, not out of guilt, but because I suddenly realized how empty I had become. Days turned into weeks. George finally came home for a few days, pretending everything was fine. He asked about Liam, about the house, but not once did he ask how I was. I smiled through it, played the role, but something in me had shifted permanently. Liam noticed too. He kept his distance more after that, and I was grateful. The line we almost crossed, the emotional line, was one we both knew shouldn't be touched. We never spoke about that night again, but it lingered in the air, like a shadow that refused to fade. When summer ended, Liam packed his things and left for college. The morning he left, he gave me a small folded paper. I didn't open it until after he was gone. It said, "You helped me feel seen." I sat there for a long time holding that note. It was such a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. I realized then that sometimes betrayal isn't about an act. It's about neglect, about silence, about the small moments where people stop being present for each other. George came home that evening, kissed my cheek out of habit, and went straight to his office. I stood in the hallway, watching him disappear into another call, another world that didn't include me. That night, I sat alone again, but it felt different. I wasn't just lonely anymore, I was aware of what I'd allowed to happen to my life, how slowly I'd let myself fade into someone I barely recognized. I started writing again. Not to anyone, not about anyone, just for myself. I wrote about love and loss, about longing and silence, about the thin line between loyalty and loneliness. I poured out everything that had been buried inside me for years. Time passed. Months went by, and the ache became quieter, easier to carry. George and I continued our routine. Meals, small talk, polite smiles, but it was all surface. I knew something had broken beyond repair. Then one evening, George found the note. I had kept it tucked inside a book, and somehow it slipped out. He asked who it was from. I told him the truth, that it was from Liam. His face tightened, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded quietly and left the room. That silence was worse than shouting. Later that night, he came to me and said, "You've been unhappy for a long time, haven't you?" I didn't answer, because the truth was too heavy. He sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "I don't know when we stopped being us." It was the first honest thing he'd said in years, and somehow that broke me more than anger ever could, because deep down I knew he was right. We hadn't been us for a long time. We were two strangers living under the same roof, pretending we were fine. In the weeks that followed, something softened between us. Not love, not forgiveness, but a quiet acknowledgement that we'd both failed each other. I stopped waiting for him to change, and he stopped pretending everything was perfect. We existed in an uneasy peace, two people bound by history but separated by silence. Sometimes I still think about that summer, about the warmth, the laughter, the rain tapping against the windows, about Liam's quiet understanding, and the way he reminded me that I was still capable of being seen. It wasn't love, not really. It was a moment of connection between two lonely hearts that met at the wrong time, in the wrong way. I don't justify it. I don't excuse it. But I understand it now. Because betrayal doesn't always come wrapped in lies or infidelity. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of attention, the quiet forgetting of what once mattered. George and I eventually parted ways. Not with a fight, but with exhaustion. He moved to another city for work, and I stayed behind, in the same house that had once felt too big. I filled the rooms with new memories, plants, books, soft music. I learned to live alone without being lonely. Years later, I received a postcard. It was from Liam. It said he was doing well, finishing his studies, and thanked me again for the conversations that had helped him through a difficult time. There was no hidden meaning, no emotion between the lines, just gratitude. And that was enough. Reading that postcard made me realize how much we both had grown. We had walked through a storm and come out changed, not scarred. That night had taught me something I carry even now. That people don't always betray you out of malice. Sometimes they do it out of pain, confusion, or need. And sometimes, the hardest betrayal to face is the one you commit against yourself, when you stop listening to your own heart.